Isn't it crazy how, in the span of about a month, we've gotten 2 separate live-action remakes of beloved animated films about an ostracized young protagonist and their strange beast friend that eventually becomes family to them? And spoiler alert for both the live-action remakes of Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, but isn't it also crazy that they both went in extremely different directions when it comes to the original story, with the former of the two practically taking a dump on the original story and going in an entirely different direction, and the latter almost being an exact shot-for-shot remake with some marginal adjustments? The craziest thing though, I actually think that in terms of remakes, it would be better to do what Disney did with Lilo and Stitch than what DreamWorks did. I think How to Train Your Dragon 2025 is a pointless movie. But to justify why I have that viewpoint, I need to talk about and pretty much review the live-action remake and original version of How to Train Your Dragon, thus there will be spoilers. So without further ado, here are my thoughts about How to Train Your Dragon 2025. And right off the bat, I'll tell you this. I think that it's a good movie. You might have read the title and thumbnail of this video and think that I'm about to completely verbally dismantle this film, but I am not going to say that the live-action remake of How to Train Your Dragon is tasteless or horrible or ugly or anything like that. I think it is genuinely a good film, but only because it's a carbon copy of something that is already amazing. And that's my main complaint with it. Somehow, in a world with remakes and live-action adaptations that are downright disrespectful to their source material, this movie is simply too faithful to the original. It is a shot-for-shot remake, except that it's live action and doesn't change enough to justify its existence. But I say this as somebody who's watched the original right before heading to the cinema and watching the remake. If you haven't seen the original movie in a long time, or even ever, or are just a big fan of the series and want to see what changes, I think there would be worse ways to spend your time and money. It really helps that they brought back the original composer for the score because it is amazing, and I would recommend you to watch this in a Dolby Atmos theater if possible, just for that reason alone. And to be completely fair to the film, it does add or change a few things to make it marginally different from the original, but the changes are so minor that there are barely any reason to see the film at all. There are slight alterations to the script and some changes to certain scenes, but honestly, that's about it. One scene I'm glad they changed is this one with the Gronkle. In the original, Toothless plays in a bed of grass, showing that dragons like to roll around in tall grass, but Hiccup makes the Gronkle playful by grabbing some of that grass and rubbing it on the Gronkle's skin. I guess the intention was to make it seem like catnip, but it wasn't actually clear to me as a kid, or even when I rewatched it, because I don't have a cat nor access to catnip. I didn't know that catnip makes cats super playful. I just thought it was some kind of food. In the remake, this was changed to dandelions, causing the Gronkle to sneeze a ton. This is a lot more obvious and just makes it easier to understand what's happening. Another change is when Fishlegs and Snotlout bang on their shields to confuse the queen during the final battle. They confuse their own dragons while doing this, and while it is shown in the original, it wasn't made explicitly clear, so they just had Fishlegs exclaim it for the kids in the audience in the remake. I know some people are going to claim that kids are smarter than we give them credit for and this change was unnecessary, but honestly this generation's kind of cooked, so I can understand why they made that change. But they also made some additions to the story that I do feel add to the story ever so slightly. For example, we got to join Stoic and the Vikings on their initial journey to find the nest, and we get to see how it goes horribly wrong. It's a cool 3-minute scene that illustrates how dangerous it is to get to the dragon's lair, so I don't mind that they added this in. I also do appreciate how they gave Astrid and the rest of the crew some more characterization. In the remake, Astrid is a lot more ambitious and wants to become chief. Fishlegs is still the nerd character with no real changes to his person, but honestly, he had a lot of character moments in the original anyway. Roughnut and Toughnut are still stupid. They're both a bit older in the remakes, but that doesn't really go anywhere besides a single line. They do get this one joke poking fun at their casting, which got a chuckle out of me in the theater though. The only character that I feel got a meaningful change in characterization is Snotlout. Don't worry, he's still a douche, but he gets an emotionally distant dad character, and it's made clear that he's only obnoxious because he needs attention at home. It's actually a pretty good addition to the remake and adds some level of depth to Snotlout's character, especially since the original makes him and Toughnut just stupid boys with minor differences. They also made the queen feel a lot more ruthless. If I remember correctly, there's this group of Vikings that just get smushed by her, and that was definitely not in the original. These changes, though, are ultimately minor and don't impact the story as a whole. After all, we've had a perfectly good version for 15 years that doesn't have any of these additions. But what makes things worse is that there are certain additions that ultimately diminish the impact of certain key scenes. First off, there's the scene with the terrible terrors where Toothless shoots a fireball inside one of the little guys. The scene isn't in the live action, but I would argue that it's important and didn't deserve to get cut because it establishes the dragons as being susceptible to fire if it's within their own bodies, and this is a key point in defeating the queen later on in the movie. This one also might sound nitpicky, but I've gotta say it. Mason Thames does a fine job as Hiccup. He is serviceable as a live-action adaptation of the character, but gosh, I wish he had better voice direction. I say this because Jay Baruchel does a very good job at selling that Hiccup is supposed to be this pathetic failure of a man. Thames does a fine job as Hiccup, but I thought that this portrayal lacked a little bit of that teenage awkwardness that made him such a relatable and lovable character. But you know who does as good of a job as the original voice actor? Gerard Butler as Stoic DeVast, for obvious reasons. I am so glad that they got Butler to reprise his role because he is a scene stealer and every bit as good as he was in the original movies. Except that out of all of the things they changed, they botched the direction for one of his most impactful lines. In the original, when Stoic learns that Hiccup was lying to him, when Stoic tells him, "You're not my son," there's weight to it. There's a lengthy pause before that delivery, and the camera angle shifts to Stoic, where we see him the disappointment and anger in his face. There's a visible emphasis on this line of this man who has tried so hard to understand his child, but ultimately disowns him. It's a heavy line and it's so impactful, but the direction for this very scene in the live action version has none of the weight that the original has. But the big thing that people want to know about this film is how do they handle the dragons? First of all, I do want to appreciate how they kept the cartoony designs of the dragons. They didn't go for the Skyrim Game of Thronesy style dragon where everything looks the same. The different species of dragon are visually distinct and that's key to the story. But in changing the dragons to be photorealistic, they sacrificed a lot of the expressiveness that the originals had. This is something that we've seen in movies like The Lion King. While it is cool to see the photorealistic designs of the dragons, I personally feel that they weren't as expressive as the original, and a lot of their personality was lost in the jump to photorealism. That isn't to say though that Toothless isn't cute in the live action, because he is. He's still adorable and lovable and reminds me of my dog, but in the scenes where he's not trying to be cute, his expressiveness is noticeably toned down. Like in the scene where they go visit the Dragon Island for the first time, I could immediately tell something was up with Toothless in the original, but in the remake, it's kind of hard to tell that he's being subconsciously controlled. Overall though, the film doesn't make enough meaningful changes to warrant a watch from the average moviegoer, and not every change they do end up making is a good one. And the sad thing is, the film does actually lay some groundwork to make some interesting changes from the original by setting up Berk to be this sort of hub for dragon slaying. In the intro of the live action, we see that the Vikings are skilled enough to plant traps and hide their livestock in preparation for the dragon attacks. They also establish that Berk has multiple Viking clans from all over the world that are renowned for combat, but this ends up going completely nowhere. Part of what made the original so good was how intentional its world building was. Every single thing that the movie set up had some sort of payoff, like how the kids used what they learned from the training scenes against the queen. But where is the payoff for the change to Berk, making it an assemblage for various dragon slaying clans? In fact, the whole reason Astrid isn't blonde like she was in the original is because this whole clan thing was supposed to play into her character more in the new film, but it doesn't go anywhere, and it feels like it adds nothing to the story. Which leads me to the title of this video and the thought that I had earlier. The live action How to Train Your Dragon film is ultimately pointless. It trying to not change anything from the original is so offensively inoffensive that it sometimes comes off as lazy. And the worst part about this movie is how it actually makes me appreciate how Lilo and Stitch at least had the guts to take a risk with its story and try to set itself apart from its original source material. And that's ironic because the original How to Train Your Dragon had an original source material that it heavily deviated from. Yes, people didn't like the live action version, but in taking a risk, they sparked controversy and conversation around the original. But some people definitely found fun in the new movie despite its flaws. And the original still exists and got more attention than it did in years because of the discourse surrounding the live action version. Now, fans get two versions of a film and have successfully sparked interest in the franchise for a new generation. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but feel like I was just watching the original How to Train Your Dragon all over again. And to be fair, they did market the film as a faithful adaptation, and that's what they made. But you can faithfully adapt a piece of media while still making meaningful changes and giving an audience a new experience. In fact, part of the fun of watching a live-action adaptation is guessing what changes that they'll end up making. But if you change almost nothing, you don't get a new take on a beloved piece of media. You get a carbon copy, and an inferior one at that. How to Train Your Dragon 2025 is good, but it's pointless. Go watch Ballerina instead. And if you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe if you want more media deep dives, film reviews, and more. See you in the next one.